My office is in a closet. It's okay. It's okay. My family teases me. They're like, Sheila, because I love the closet. I get home's crazy, and then I go to work and it's quiet, it's dark, and I run the seed closet there as part of my job. So there's a lot of, it's the room where all the seeds are, and those seeds are for school gardens. My job is to help school gardens and community gardens. I also run the seed closet there, so it's nice and quiet, and I organize the seeds and get them out to schools. I'm also a really prolific small-scale gardener myself. It started small, it's gotten bigger and bigger. So 3 years ago we bought half an acre so I could play more. Yes, it gets bigger and bigger, and that's been about 15 years. I've been really an avid home grower. Trees, vegetables, berries. I mean, at the end, if you have a little time, you want to ask a random question about home crops. I have a lot of insights. Potatoes. I mean, you kind of think of anything you can think of to grow, and I've tried. I have not tried blueberries because it's literally impossible in New Mexico, I think, because they need that acidic soil. I suppose if you put them in a pot with imported acidic soil, but there are a few crops that you just kind of can't grow here, but all the others, go ahead and try. But let's see, it's got to be about 8 years ago I started trying with cover crops. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I do not have a soil degree. I do not have a botany degree. I have a master's in public health. I came at gardening sort of through working with young people in the gardens and really realizing how beneficial it was for them to be outside, to be learning about plants. But working in county extension for this long, I've come across a lot of information. And one of the things I've done is I've attended annual conferences, and I've always gone for many years to hear one man in particular and talking about soil health, and I've learned a lot about soil health. But a lot of this presentation is going to be based on my practical implementation of cover crops myself. So this is me using cover crops to improve my soil at my house, and we're going to have a lot of pictures and such like that. So raise your hand if you kind of feel like you know anything about cover crops. Okay. If you know a lot about cover crops, okay, who's used them? Okay, if you've used them, do you know if there's a particular kind you've used, or?
Yeah.
What do you use?
I use hairy vetch, I use clover, and I also use winter rye.
Okay, winter rye, hairy vetch, and clover, some of the common ones. Did you have?
Well, I use the orchard mix that is sold at Plants of the Southwest.
Which is what I use. So.
And it's coming back in some places every year.
Yes. Oh, we'll talk about that. Yes. That's actually the very first mix I got. I just went to Plants of the Southwest and got that mix and started using it. So we're going to talk about the different places you can get it. I mean, I don't advocate getting it anywhere in particular. You can get cover crops a lot of different places, but if you feel overwhelmed, it's always nice to go somewhere and say, help me. So nurseries who have cover crops, some have cover crops, a lot of nurseries don't, but if they do, they can help you pick some.
Did you say orchard mix?
Yes, it's called the orchard mix. I actually give it out to school gardens to rehabilitate their soil, so I'll pass around. I wrote a paper on it. It's on the orchard mix from Plants of the Southwest. I actually wrote a little write-up on it because it's what I was giving out, so I might as well have educated people about it. So that's my educational piece about it. But that's definitely not the only product out there. So let's talk about cover crops. First of all, let's acknowledge that cover crops are not something super rare. They're what our prairies were. They're what a lot of our undisturbed land was doing. This is just a way for us to describe certain crops we use, really, by and large, to improve soil and to benefit things like erosion and water control. Well, that's what was happening in our native prairies when we had these grasses and lagoons and things growing together. They were reducing erosion. One of the reasons the Dust Bowl happened is that we took these crops out, put in farmland. We basically took out cover crops, which we call them now, put in farmland, and it really fed into the Dust Bowl. So cover crops are just something that as you're driving around the heartland where they have reintroduced prairies, those are basically all kinds of pollinators and cover crops. So here's a definition. A cover crop is a plant that is used primarily to slow erosion, improve soil health, enhance water availability, smother weeds, help control pests and diseases, increase biodiversity, and bring a host of other benefits to your farm or raised bed. You can use them anywhere. So you can plant them anywhere you want. I put them in raised beds. You'll see all kinds of places I put them trying to rehabilitate my soil. So they're just really multi-use. But I want to thank the person who taught me the most about them, which was Ron Gooden. He's a CSU extension agent in Colorado. He's now retired a couple years back, but every year he would come to the organic farming conference. Anybody used to go to the organic farming conference when it was live? Yeah. And I would always go hear him because, yeah, but he can go to the same talk over and over because he just was such a wealth of knowledge. I just felt like, oh, I just learned something new. I know this is the same talk he gave last year on soil health, but I would go hear him over and over. And one of the things I really learned from him is that when you're working with soil, he was in southern Colorado, kind of a similar area to us, high desert, colder climate, more snow. But one of the things he was really adamant about is that when we were dealing with soil, he was a soil specialist, we should have what's called 100% cover 100% of the time. All that means is no bare dirt. No bare dirt. That was his thing. If he drives, if he was driving around and seeing a lot of bare dirt, when you leave your soil bare, you're getting huge evaporation. If it gets bare and dry, then your microbes in there, or your beneficial microbes, are dying as your soil dries up. So what did he used to say? What did he used to call it? He's like, I don't want to see your soil naked, thirsty, and something else. But he would say when we leave bare soil, we basically really deprive it of keeping the life in it and keeping it alive. And so I'm always have in my head 100% cover 100% of the time, and that can be as simple as when you have a raised bed, don't leave it bare all winter. Please, I beg you, cover it with something. Put cardboard over that soil, put leaves over that soil, put some sort of mulch over that soil, put some plastic over that soil. Just try to keep that soil moist. Basically, when you're covering soil and keeping it moist in there, water it a little bit, you're keeping all those lovely beneficial microbes alive. And I don't know how much you've learned about all the soil health. Have you learned a lot about beneficial microbes and all of that? Right. So we just don't want these spring winds to come in and whip over that bare soil and dry it out. So this is what it looks like in my yard. These are my vegetable beds in the winter, ones that I don't have like kale and stuff in. I put leaves over them. That's another bed I have. I'm a big fan of putting logs around my beds. And this is another idea, is just cutting down a crop and letting it stay there. Of course, if it has seeds, we're going to talk a lot about seeds, right? So if a crop has seeds in it, you cut it down, what's going to happen? You get more of that crop. But you can if you have a crop that doesn't have any seeds, you can just cut it down at the end of the season and let it stay on top of the soil. It's better than bare soil. Okay, so let's talk more specifically about cover crops. So this is basically what a prairie grass looks like when you remove it from the soil. And what do you observe about it? The roots. This is the heart of one of the main reasons we want to use cover crops in New Mexico is these. You never pull cover crops up generally, you cut them off. Because what happens, those roots rot in the soil, and what are we lacking in our soil here?
Organic matter.
Yes. So anything you can do to get organic matter in the soil, and a lot of cover crops are going to be contributing that to your soil. Now sometimes there are some cover crops that come back that don't die in the winter, and I just want them out. Like I've learned that the hard way. Like this cover crop is never going away, and sometimes I will dig those up with their roots, but I'll talk more about which ones those are. So build soil structure, a lot of times by those roots being in there. When you have that dense clay soil, the other thing that happens is these roots go in there and kind of break it up, create some air pockets, and your beneficial microbes can get in there and kind of survive because clay is so dense. Adds organic matter. My favorite one for that, and he really taught me this, is the daikon radish. That is a dreamy crop. You just grow a bunch of daikon radish. There's some other ones you can grow, any big radish, There's another one, icicle radish, really big radishes. You grow them, you cut off the top, and you just let that big daikon radish rot in the soil. It's dreamy for clay soil. It's dreamy for sandy soil. I used to live up in the heights, now I live in the valley. When I was in the heights, I had really sandy soil. That's where I started with cover crops. Sandy soil needs organic matter too. Feeds the beneficial microbes and pollinators. So a lot of these plants have a flower like clover that the pollinators love. Protects against soil erosion. These are being planted now as a strategy on the sides of, like, so if you're on a highway and then there's an embankment that goes up, cover crops can be planted so that you don't get all that erosion. But if you have a place in your yard where you have a hill or, I mean, erosion is just as basic as the wind coming along, right? Every time this wind comes along, it's eroding our soil. Which my husband likes to say, your soil's going to Phoenix. Or whatever. So there it goes. I don't know why I picked Phoenix, but he did. So if you have something growing in the soil, you're not going to be losing that soil. Conserve soil moisture, because evaporation in really exposed soil is a big thing. I would love to quantify how much evaporation we're getting in kind of bare soil. Like say you have one tomato plant planted and it's bare all around it and then you water it. How much is lost to evaporation? Of course, it matters what time of day you're watering it, right? And I hope you guys are incredibly diligent not to be watering in the middle of the afternoon. But these crops can help fix nitrogen. That's one of the main reasons they're used in, especially on farms. This is a big thing now, using cover crops on farms, is that you can use cover crops that are legumes. And I'm going to get to the list of what the cover crops are. There's list after list after list of what they are. But if they're a legume and then you plant them, then they can help fix nitrogen in your soil and really reduce, they've been shown statistically to reduce fertilizer use. And so they can improve your yield. If you're a small scale farmer or even really want to have a productive backyard garden, we want better yields. Let's talk, I had time, let's see. Let's talk about what they are. Okay, forage for animals. These are my chickens yesterday. Eating, I don't know, I think it's sanfoin. I don't say that right. S-A-N-F-O-I-N. I don't know how to say it right, but that's the cover crop that I have, and they love it. Okay, I don't like busy slides, and here I made one. So there's basically lots of ways to describe cover crops. There's legume versus non-legume. So your non-legume ones are cereal type ones, rye, wheat, barley, oats, triticale, forage grasses, ryegrass, or broadleaf ones such as buckwheat, mustards, brassicas, including, and usually the brassica that's used is the radish. It's called a forage radish, a tillage radish. You'll see that in the catalogs. They call them, usually it's daikon radish. They like to call them forage radishes or tillage radishes. And so these are really useful for scavenging nutrients. That means the plant takes up nutrients, and then if that, say you have a radish, a giant daikon, it takes up the nutrients in the soil, and then you cut it off, the tops off, and let it rot in there. Well, that nutrients is available again for the soil. Provide erosion control, suppress weeds. It really does work, folks. You see my yard; they get crazy, these cover crops, and then they really smother out other weeds. And it adds organic matter. Okay, then you have the legumes, and that's the red clover, crimson clover, vetch, peas, beans, and they fix a lot of nitrogen for subsequent crops. And they prevent erosion, support beneficial insects. So these all have multi-uses. But the other way to describe them, so there's legume and non-legume, is warm versus cold, and that is when they germinate. So there are cover crops that germinate at 28 degrees. Some of them I love, like winter wheat. I hope I don't bore you with my love of winter wheat. But I love winter wheat, and it germinates at a really, cold temperature. And so you can also, by the time, you could basically be starting a cover crop at any time of the year. I'm going to start passing around these. There's charts after chart after chart about cover crops. I'm going to pass out two. One is from one of the ACES NMSU publications, and then there's another one here, and it's kind of like how to choose a cover crop for what you want to do with your soil. I'll pass these out different directions, but if you
get access to the list
to these,
yeah.
So at the end of this presentation, this is if you write down ACES, you know the ACES publications, right? No, okay. NMSU has these publications called ACES, A-C-E-S, I shouldn't make assumptions about what you've learned or not, and they're basically publications on all kinds of agricultural topics. So the ACES publication 150 is on here. It's called Principles of Cover Cropping and for Arid and Semi-Arid Farming Systems. It's basically about cover cropping in New Mexico. So this is the ACES 150. So, so how you choose a cover crop, legume, non-legume, warm versus cold, and that's just what time of year is it, and do you want to start a cover crop? You can basically start one any time of year. You just need to find the right one. Okay, there's also broadleaf versus grasses. It's another way to look at them. I really simplified this too. What do I want to look at? Because I love the way winter wheat looks. Winter wheat is gorgeous. And I'll tell you something, if you're from the Midwest, or I grew up in Florida, if you miss green, just grow winter wheat in the winter. It is green, 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 and it does this thing, and that's just beautiful, beautiful crop in the winter. And they all have benefits to soil too, so that's the other way you can, if you have a problem in your soil, you can say, okay, what do I need to do? You can look up different kind of charts, and the chart will say, okay, you need more nitrogen. Plant these ones, mostly the legume. You need to break up your soil because your soil is too compact. Plant these ones. And then have you learned about inoculation of legumes? It's a powder you can put on any legume you put in the soil, and it really enhances their ability to fix nitrogen by a lot. So it's a really good thing to buy. You basically just put it on whatever cover crop. Say you're going to put in vetch, which is a cold weather legume cover crop. You get your veg seeds, you soak them in this kind of powder, put this powder on them. It's called inoculation powder, and then you plant them, and it improves their ability to fix the nitrogen, which is really helpful. So basically, those roots fix nitrogen, and then when you let those roots rot in the soil, that nitrogen's available. So that's kind of how the cover cropping is working. If this is not making sense, raise your hand. I really want you to. I don't want you to feel like I'm confusing. I'm not going to go over this. This is another way to look at cover crops. Cover crops by function. Do you need to build your soil? Do you need to fix nitrogen? Do you need to loosen your soil? Again, it's just the same thing I was talking about. There's different ways to look up cover crops. Okay, I am going to read this one because I thought it was really interesting. This is from this ACES publication. Okay, generally cover crops with high carbon to nitrogen ratios will decompose and release nutrients more slowly, while crops with low CN ratios will rapidly decompose and release nutrients into the soil. So that means basically, for example, corn residue will decompose more slowly than a cowpea residue. It is therefore important to note that for short-term nutrient supply through decomposition, cover crops that include legumes and legume mixtures are more likely to deliver nutrients faster because they decompose faster, especially when compared to cereals and grasses. So that's the takeaway. If you want to improve your soil and get more nitrogen in your soil, to have higher yields, plant a legume. The cereals and the grasses are cover crops that won't deliver that bang so quickly. I would love to give this talk. This is my favorite talk to give, a lot about like New Mexico soil, but I think you probably just know by going in your backyard, we don't have much organic matter. We don't have that dreamy topsoil. We have the sand and this clay, and we have this high alkalinity. And we also, in some of our environments, have salts. In the valley, we have high salts in our clay. And so all of these problems can be improved by cover crops. And I'd like to point out that for salts, barley is a cover crop that can actually tolerate and even pull out a little bit of salt. Although when Ron Gooden would talk about barley, people would say, oh great, you can get rid of all the salt by planting barley. And he's like, no, it's actually a pretty minimal amount it'll take out. I mean, cover crops aren't miracle workers. They do really contribute.
I have a question about that. So if the barley takes up the salt, when you cut it off, doesn't it just go back to salt?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That might be one you want to remove. If you're using it for salinity, you might, I don't like throwing things away. I'm a big recycler in my yard, but that might be a time you cut off your barley and put it in the trash. Or take it somewhere else, you know what I mean, in your property where you're not worried about the salts. But yeah, good point. If it's trapping the salts in the barley, consider carefully what you want to do with the tops of the barley. Now you're thinking, that's how we use cover crops, yeah. Okay, we have this also, we get 9 inches of rain a year. This is when we get it, and so we need to do anything we can to preserve water in the soil and to stop evaporation. There are a few downsides to cover cropping. This is my yard. This is my yard, and so I have an area that I called the orchard, and it was really heavy clay soil, and it's like a big field. And I wanted to use cover crops to improve that soil. So that's at the base of a cherry tree, a young cherry tree. And one of the things I wish I had known when I started a couple years ago is that some of them are are perennial, and winter doesn't kill them. So you can kind of get a cover crop problem. So if you are using cover crops in, say, a big field, you have to be prepared that if they reseed, you're going to have that plant coming up all of the time. Or if it's a perennial and it's going to not be dying in winter. So this plant right here, it's a sand one. It never goes away. It's just kind of there all of the time. And so if I really want that cover crop to go away, I'm going to have to dig it up. It does have beautiful flowers, and the bees love it. And so I'm going to leave it for now. But at some point, I might want, for example, in my orchard, I might want more like grasses, like buffalo grass or fescue. I might want it to look more pastoral. It looks kind of rangy right now. I mean, it's kind of beautiful, but you'll see it gets a little wild. So you can have reseeding problems with cover crops. They can kind of take over. You can kind of get this cover crop weed situation where some are kind of, if they're like this one, it has really strong roots. It's a little hard to dig out, not too bad. When you're using cover crops, if you have a lot of them, your soil is not going to heat up as fast in the spring because bare soil does heat up fast. That's one advantage of bare soil. It does heat up really fast. So let's get to some.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
So I felt like I was a dog chasing her tail and actually caught it and didn't know what to do about it. And
Because they were coming up over and over?
yeah. And what Joe Gardner suggested is to cut it to the ground, to leave the roots, because that's why you want
Yeah, leave the roots. Always leave the roots, yeah.
put cardboard on top
Yes.
of it.
Yes.
And then, put like bricks on it so it doesn't, but it will actually, it can't photosynthesize.
Yep.
So it's actually going to end up benefiting the soil, and you can actually grow other things on top of it.
So you have a cover crop problem, cut it off,
Yeah.
just leave it there, pile it high with cardboard. I do this all the time. I
Yeah.
hoard big cardboard boxes for this
Yeah,
reason.
yeah.
Hold that cardboard down. Don't let any light there, and let all of that under there rot. And your soil's improving.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if you have like legumes, if they actually seed, it actually takes the benefit of the nitrogen away. So
Okay.
you actually want to cut those.
I'm going to get to the
legumes.
cutting thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
cutting them, because it's only beneficial when it's not grown fruit.
Because once it's growing fruit, it's energy. But if you cut off that fruit and let it go back in there, the energy's going back to the ground too. But I know, yes, there are different cycles of where the energy is in the cover crop cycle. And if you want to really dive into that, there's lots online. But then one of the main ways that people use cover crops is you grow them, you let them get to a certain height before they get seeds or right as they get immature seeds, and you cut them down. That is the main way people use cover crops, especially on farms. So you're just interrupting that cycle. So if you don't want to end up with a reseeding problem, just cut them down. A month or two into them growing, cut them down. Maybe you never do them again. You can do them once. You don't have to do cover crops over and over. You have a really clay, dense, awful piece of soil, a really sandy piece of soil, you want to rehabilitate it. Do a couple months of cover crops, cut them down before they get seeds. You don't have to end up in that problem, but if you do, there are ways to deal with it, and you can always call us at Extension, and we'll help you through that. So there's these other terms. Oh yeah, sorry, Mary, you wanted to say something? Or?
I was just wondering if it makes sense to plant cover crop legumes between rows of other things that I have in my garden, just from the standpoint of covering the soil more so that you have less evaporation.
think it's my next slide. So what we're talking about where you have green manure, this is, you might hear this term, you don't have to remember. This is where you cut the cover crop down. In big farms, they often will till it in. But the other thing you could do is this kind of cover crop interplanted with other crops, right? So you can, if they do this a lot in orchards, they put the cover crops between the trees. You can put it between your tomatoes. You can water a bed with it. Did you have a specific?
No, tomatoes is one of the things. Oh, but then the other main thing is garlic, because my garlic, is spread out, and there's a lot of bare soil between. And right now-
Although we have a saying, and farmers have a saying about garlic. Garlic does not like to compete with any other thing. Garlic really likes to be left alone.
Okay.
Garlic doesn't even like to have weeds around it. So garlic may be a thing I would plant tight. But you could try it. I mean, cover crops they're not destructive. They can generally live in harmony with most things, especially if you're going to do that, I might try one. Because there's mixes, right? I have bags up over here, and I'm going to give you some to take home if you want. But there's mixes where it has all kinds of different cover crops in there. You can just get one kind. I'm going to put a little vetch. You can even just plant any kind of bean. Any kind of bean that you cut down before it's, seeds is a cover crop. So
What I did now is I got a bale of straw and I put straw over the bare ground.
yeah.
Would you put alfalfa in an orchard?
A lot of people do. Alfalfa is a cover crop. I don't know much about alfalfa, and I think I would just research it. There's an organization called SARE, S-A-R-E. I can't remember what it stands for right now. But they have so much on their site about cover crops. It's like soil. It's one of the government agencies. SARE, and you can look up. They have like a sheet on each cover crop, and you can look up alfalfa and see what it's beneficial for. It's I definitely hear it used on farms. Okay, so here is, actually I went out and took this picture this morning. That's winter wheat beneath my apple tree, and that's what I call the orchard or the field. And by rangy, I just mean it looks kind of like clumpy. That's a lot of different cover crops. Most of them have lived through the winter or are coming up again. Here's some random garlic. So that's how it looks right now. That's not how it always looks. But that winter wheat, I just let it reseed every year right there. I just like the way it looks, and I feel like it protects that soil right there. The cats chew on it, the dogs chew on it, and the chickens love it. I actually, this year I had a hard time getting it to come up. I usually let it go to like 2 feet, 2-3 feet, but the animals kept going.
So does it get the wheat berries you can harvest it?
Yeah, sure. I have a billion of them for you. If anybody wants to try it. There it is. I mean, if you grow the right kind, you can probably grind it, yeah. So if I don't want it to reseed, I'll show you an area where I was using and I didn't want it. I just cut it down before it got these. But I also sometimes just cut them off because I don't want it to reseed at that rate. It makes so many, and I'll go and cut them off, and then I have them at work for anybody who wants them. So feel free to take them. But it stays really green until it gets, late summer, and then it gets real crispy, and if you let it go through its cycle. So there it is where I cut. That's the same location in June. A lot. So